Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining this program. My name is Dr. David Glassner. I'm the superintendent of the Shaker Heights Schools, and we are thrilled to be able to share with you some of the research that we've done around our own practices. I'm thrilled to welcome Dr. Margaret Thornton from Rowan University. As many of you probably know, if you're joining this program, Dr. Thornton conducted a qualitative study of our efforts related to detracking last school year. And we're here this evening to provide Dr. Thornton with an opportunity to share some of her findings and also to help answer any questions or respond to any feedback that members of our community may have. I just want to first, before we get underway, number one, I want to acknowledge and appreciate Dr. Thornton for her work and her effort. It's really quite an opportunity that we have as a school district to have somebody like Dr. Thornton come and learn about our school district and the fantastic work that we're doing, and then come and share the areas that we're doing well in and areas that we have to improve in. So we really appreciate the work that has gone into this so far. I also want to acknowledge Dr. John Moore, our Director of Curriculum and Instruction, who has joined us this evening as well. He will be sharing some additional quantitative data towards the end of this presentation for folks who are interested in sticking around. And I'd also like to acknowledge, I don't know if folks can see her, but Julie Hewlett, a member of our communications department, who is helping to make this evening happen. There, you can see on the slide in front of you that comments and questions are welcome throughout the presentation. Dr. Moore will be helping us moderate those comments and questions, but really feel free to ask questions that you may have or insert comments that come up as Dr. Thornton embarks on her presentation. So with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Thornton. Again, thank you everyone for being here. This presentation is being recorded, I should note, so that we can share it with people who are unable to attend after this presentation is over. But please be aware of that. Again, thank you very much for being here. We look forward to continuing to talk about detracking and the work that we're doing together. Dr. Thornton, thank you for being here.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Thank you to Dr. Moore, Dr. Glasner for having me, inviting me, partnering with us here at Rowan to study what you all are doing in Shaker. And then you could go ahead and go to the next slide. So I also just want to, this is a review of the research process that we went through. I'm not going to read this out to you because you all can read that, but we ended up with close to 40 hours of qualitative interviews with our focus groups, with teachers across from preschool to 12th grade, school counselors, administrators, students. That was like one of the just greatest joys to get to talk to the kids in Shaker, because that's who this is all about. That's who this work is for. Able to get into some classrooms again at all levels, from preschool up into the senior level classes, parents, and then had some opportunities also to look at some demographic trends. So this work is not meant to be generalizable. This is about Shaker. This isn't meant to be, oh, we ran these regressions or some of the fancier quantitative analyses that I know Dr. Moore is going to talk about later. Those are very interesting to me personally and in my research. But here I wanted to I wanted to look at trends over time in the demographics, these different demographics here. And then also I wanted to see, folks were, I was hearing things from folks, and I kind of wanted to check and see, like, okay, do the numbers match up with what people are feeling? And then where there's discontinuity, where can we talk about it? What can we do there? So this is what we went through. And when I say we, I have a great team. I have a graduate student working with me on this. She is in her second year of her PhD studies. She, before that, was a principal in Philadelphia Public Schools. So, she has seen it all. And she provided some really great feedback. And then we also worked with a really wonderful transcribing team to get transcriptions of all of this wonderful qualitative data that we collected. I will say I collected, I did that, but the team then worked through again with the help of Dr. Moore and Dr. Glasner and the entire community coming together, making time, making space. I really want to acknowledge that I know that was a lot of work. So we can look at the next slide to start to talk about some of the things that we saw. So by and large, community members expressed support for detracking. There was this general sense of the status quo in Shaker was not working. And I heard from a lot of parents from different demographics saying, you know, we moved here because of the diversity. That diversity is important. We recognize that that's important, not just from issues of equity, but also for our students, right? So, you know, I'm the mom to a white male, and for him to be able to be successful in the world, he's going to have to understand how to work with people who are different from him, who have different life experiences. And that was something that I heard a lot. But there's also a sense of, particularly among parents and teachers, that the district moved quite quickly. Some said too quickly in implementing detracking. It felt very fast for a lot of people. And there were also some parents who expressed concerns about enrollment. How is this going to affect the number of kids that we have in Shaker? And then I just want to talk a little bit about the students that I got to talk to as well. It was just so wonderful. Students at the middle school were very supportive. And I heard something that really stuck with me. And I heard it in the two different focus groups that I did there at the middle school, that there were friends, they had friends from elementary school, so younger elementary school before tracking was put in place. Then they were tracked, then they were detracked again in middle school. And they were seeing kids like, oh yeah, I remember that kid from third grade. And I didn't know what happened to him. That was really I don't know, very warm. They were just very warm in the way that they talked about that. It was more of a variety of experience at the high school level, with some students feeling like they were being pushed into classes that they weren't quite prepared for. And then some students with concerns about whether or not, you know, classmates were doing the work, were contributing to the community. But there were also high school students, particularly Dr. Glassner's supervisory committee of students. They were very supportive. And they also said, again, that same thing that I heard from the middle schoolers. Wow, I'm seeing kids I haven't seen since third grade. And that just really stuck with me. That was a point that really came home in a lot of my discussions with students. And then I found the strongest support, not as much qualification, among counselors, both at the middle and high school level, and then also administrators, again, across from elementary through the high school. And we could talk a little bit about why that might be or what that might mean. But these were, I think, the themes that really came through as we went through the qualitative data and the transcript. So we can look at the next slide too. And then the quantitative, so just the numbers, again, these are trends, right? They're not at all regressions or anything to say this is statistically significant, but they are things that I think are important to note as you all as a community decide how you want to move forward. So there's actually a decreasing numbers of Black and multiracial students in some IB courses over the last couple of years, and increasing demographic differences in MAP scores for the same cohorts over time. And that was something I wanted to also draw out in that we saw. So, you know, you might see in third grade reading scores, Black students and white students are this far apart. But then they take the map again, maybe in fifth grade, they move a little farther apart. So that suggests, I think, some room to address some opportunity gaps for those students. There were also, this was something I heard from students first, and then I heard again from teachers. So I wanted to dig into the data. So symphonic band demographics might drive other courses during the day. So even if the overall vision is we want to detrack, we want to celebrate the diversity of our school, have kids together as much as possible. If you have some classes like symphonic band that are really popular, primarily with white and wealthy kids, then that's going to drive your classes, your master schedule for the rest of the day. And I think that's something to think about, both in terms of, okay, what could we maybe do with the master scheduling, but also how can we get more kids interested in symphonic band? That's just a wonderful opportunity. I didn't come from a school district that had that. I don't live in a school district that has that now. So that's something that you all could be, I think, offering to more children. I thought the math acceleration was quite interesting. I was expecting to see a larger number of kids being accelerated. We tend in literature around tracking and giftedness, we tend to see over time a sort of squeaky wheel gets the grease mentality where, administrators might say, okay, if you're going to complain, like we'll just do this, rather than thinking really carefully about what's the right way to accelerate the kids who are ready, because we don't want to be holding anybody back. We don't want to be denying anyone access to knowledge. And the math acceleration numbers, I thought, reflected a careful process of how those decisions are made. But there are still racial disparities in that acceleration. White students are more likely to be accelerated than other students. And then boys are often more likely to be accelerated than girls. So those are some questions I think for you all as a community to chew on and to think about, how do we handle these disparities? And are they, I can't answer this question for you, this is a question for your community, are they indicative of some other opportunity gaps earlier in student learning? I thought it was also really interesting. You all are doing just a great job and like really bucking some national trends around discipline. So fifth and 10th grade, that the fifth, so they're sixth and 11th graders now, but they were fifth and 10th graders when I was looking at the data. They had not come back to the pre-pandemic levels. Otherwise, you all, your discipline adjudications are really going in the right order, right direction. And also, discipline was not something that I heard much about from teachers. They weren't talking to me about discipline problems that they were having in the classroom. In fact, several eighth grade teachers across subjects said to me they felt like one of the positives of the detracking program was that discipline had really improved. That students who tended to be, cut ups, class clowns, sometimes in a tracking paradigm, can be lumped together and they really play off of each other with that energy. And they have a ready audience of kids who are maybe not as engaged. But when you kind of diffuse the goofballs, you have them with some kids who are taking the subject a little more seriously, that behavior, the eighth grade teacher said over and over again that they had really seen that dissipate relative to other years. And then I wanted to address the enrollment declines. That was a concern that I heard about from a lot of parents. The enrollment declines in the district have studied since the pandemic. They're not particularly different from national trends, and you're actually seeing fewer. It's still a decrease, but it's a smaller decrease than Ohio overall. I know you all are working with a different group on your enrollment, and there's an enrollment report that can get you more into those numbers. But I did spend some time checking that out because that was something that I heard from a number of parents that they were concerned about. I don't think enrollment is going in the right direction. You want to see numbers going up, but they're not going noticeably down. And I don't think they're going down in a way that you can necessarily attribute cumulatively to any one thing other than particularly the pandemic. Folks who were like, well, I don't want my kid back at all, and you're doing hybrid, so we're going to move to totally online. And also people feeling like, well, you're doing hybrid and I went all in person, so we're going to move to a school that's in person. That seems to be how those numbers are really shaking out. And you're still having quite a lot of folks come in from outside districts. So we can also look at the next slide. Thank you so much. So, I was talking to Dr. Moore about this. I know there's going to be a formal presentation of the learning from the entire report. It's like 30, 40 pages. So we're not going to go through all of that tonight, but I wanted to focus on the community focused recommendations that we worked through. This is based on our learning go and this my graduate assistant, my own communities of practice, so other tracking and detracking researchers, and then the literature reviews around tracking and detracking. I think there's still a deep need to hear from parents about this program and discuss related community values. And a lot of parents were really open about the tension that they felt. Again, we moved to Shaker because we care about diversity. Many parents who grew up in the district and returned to the district because they had such a wonderful experience, but then feeling like the detracking program was maybe not serving their particular students, or it just happened so fast, they didn't have a strong sense of where this is going. And I think you've got to keep those conversations up. And honestly, I don't think they'll ever end. Another district that I've worked with out on Long Island, they've been detracking for about 20 years now. They're having sessions just like this right now. They're continuing to talk about what's the right way forward, what's the right balance, how do we help support students with disabilities, how do we help support students who just move really, really quickly through material. So I think that continuing to have a good structure there would be really helpful. I also heard both from teachers and parents that there is a need and an interest for parents to come into the classroom. And I think that's a great way to assist with differentiation with appropriate training, right? So it's not just like you sign up and you're going to bring the cupcakes for the Halloween party, right? Like there needs to be some sort of rigorous introduction to what we're trying to do here. And that was something that I heard from a few parents, interest in particular. Other districts that I've worked with have done some project-based learning for students who tend to move more quickly through the material, right? So they might be done with all their third grade math for the day. There's still 20 minutes left in the math block. Well, they're working on their own year-long project that incorporates their own interests. That's the way that they can accelerate and still be with their peers. Well, you all have at your disposal experts in numerous fields who, could come in one morning a week, or maybe even just one morning a month, and work with students who are really interested in architecture, for example, or other some like real world application of the places where students are feeling really strong. And then I'm also a big fan of this portrait of a graduate trend that we're seeing all over the country. Virginia, where I'm from, where I got my PhD, they recently engaged in this work. It's a little bit less than 10 years now, so recently in academic terms. But it was a real community, statewide endeavor to say, what do we want our kids to know? What are our common values? What are our common goals? What do kids need to leave Shaker Heights High School being able to do? I think that meaningful work can help to then backward design a program that meets those values and those goals. And I think continue hosting educators and community members from detracking districts to talk about their own successes and their own challenges, right? Like it's not to be like, this is the one right way to do it. It's so amazing. If you don't like this, there's something wrong with you. Because it's all that we do in education is, I say this to my students all the time, it's so context dependent. And that's why education research can feel so slippery, because you'll read and think, oh, this is a great idea, let's do it here. But you have a whole other set of context that you then have to bring in. And so to continue to have those conversations, and that was something that a number of parents said that they had appreciated previously, particularly the educators from Evanston Township who have been having some dialogue with you all, that they found that really helpful. This idea of like, okay, we didn't just make this up. These are confronting some national trends, some national ideas about what's the right way to meet all students' needs without inadvertently engaging in discriminatory practices. So that's something that I would also really encourage you all to continue to do. And that's also something as I mentioned, the first time I met you, probably also the second time I met you, if I've met you more than once. I serve as the chairwoman of the American Educational Research Association's Tracking and Detracking Special Interest Group. So I've gotten to know a lot of these folks all over the country who are engaging in this work and thinking about it across the spectrum. Just from, okay, we're going to drop our prerequisites for AP classes all the way to, all right, everybody's in honors, and that's what we're doing. And we're making it a rigorous, meaningful honors class. So I'm really happy to help facilitate some of those introductions because I think those could be really helpful. Can I have my next slide, which I think is yes. So that's the end of my sort of prepared remarks. I'm happy to take questions. I know Dr. Moore has a plan for how that should go, but I just wanted to say that I really hope this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship. I have a Casablanca poster behind me, but I don't think you can see it. But I just am so appreciative for how everyone in the district who I met welcomed me. I felt so welcomed. I felt like folks were just so incredibly honest and vulnerable. What you all are trying to get at in Shaker gets to the heart of what public education is about and for, and how do we meet the needs of individual students and the community at the same time. And that's really hard. And I hope that I can continue to help you all wade through some of those thoughts as a little bit of an outsider. I think sometimes it's easier to talk to somebody who doesn't live, you're not going to run into me at church or football game or anything like that. And also, I have the free time to stay on top of the research. So these are some ways we can stay in touch. And I hope I'll be seeing you again soon. So thank you all again so much, and turn things back over to Dr. Moore.
Thank you, Dr. Thornton. We do have some questions coming in through the chat. Folks, you are welcome to continue to put your questions there. Maggie, I'll just feed them to you little by little if you don't mind. You just spoke to how we have this relationship developing. Can you talk about how this all started? How did we get connected? Can you tell that story a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So have you all ever heard of Laura Meckler? Do you know her? I'm joking. She obviously wrote a book about Shaker. She and I know each other from Twitter. She's really interested in having, I think her takes on education are very evidence-based. She's really interested in getting at the nuance of what research can and cannot tell us. So she and I had made that connection previously, and I had told her about my own interest in tracking and detracking and just kind of trying to understand what's going on here. How can we sort students? How can we organize students in ways that don't sort of just reproduce the same inequalities we've seen over time? And she said, "Oh, I should introduce you to John Moore." So she did. A few months later, I was flying out to see you all. Rowan has been really supportive. I should thank them too. This work is funded by my own startup funds. So Shaker did not pay me. I don't work for Shaker. I work for Rowan. I am working to get tenure at Rowan. Like, that is my focus. And this is a part of that, being able to engage with communities about educational research and do research with communities in partnership. And so Dr. Moore and I just got to talking and thinking about how could we leverage the resources that I have as an educational researcher to then come and help you all uncover some of what's happening.
Thanks, Dr. Thornton. And one of those things that you've helped us to think critically about in that uncovering process has been the challenges that teachers are facing. Can you speak a little bit more about the kinds of things that you heard that teachers were facing?
Yeah, I think so. Again, most teachers, and not all, I don't think 100%. I don't think there was any statement that anyone said 100% of the time. Most teachers said they thought that there was something needed to change, right? Teachers were seeing this. They were seeing, okay, my honors class comes in and it looks one way, mostly white students. And then my lower level, so-called lower level classes come in and it looks a different way. And I'm not sure that that lines up with students' skills or interests. So there was a recognition there. But it's challenging. It's challenging to go from one way of teaching. And I think a lot of teachers, myself included, become teachers because we liked school. School worked for us. The structure of school led us to be successful, to go to college, to have these experiences. And so it can be really difficult. And I did hear that from a few teachers as well. Grieving actually was the word that a couple of teachers used, thinking about how they never questioned how students ended up in particular classes before, and feeling like there was a grief to that, because nobody gets into this business thinking like, oh, I'm like out to hurt kids. Like, people want to, you do this because you love children and you want to help them succeed and have the opportunities that you had, or help them have the opportunities you didn't have. You see what you missed out on. But we can't see everything, and nobody can see everything and think critically about everything that's put in front of us. I think that teachers overall in Shaker Heights, and I think this is true of teachers everywhere, could use more meaningful professional development. So this sort of one and done, everybody in the cafeteria the day before school starts, to get a nice chit chat about sort of overarching themes and ideas, is not as helpful as like a book of, here are some strategies. Here's how you differentiate. Here's what has worked at other schools. And I think that is a challenge that and not all teachers, but that some teachers are facing. I want to also really shout out your 8th grade math team. They just have like really figured this out. And I think I seeing a question too, like what should we do? I think you should get them to talk to a lot of other teachers about what they've been doing. They seem to really be enjoying themselves. They seem to see a real benefit to an increase in diversity in the classroom. They see this program as a challenge. All right, how are we going to come at this from different directions? And it's not all rainbows. There are challenges there too. But I think, you have a lot of talent in Shaker, in your teachers, and letting them help really in structured ways and supported ways help each other figure things out. I think that could be really good.
Dr. Thorne, I just want to reiterate that point and really how actionable your findings and feedback have been. When you first shared that about our 8th grade team and really how they have embraced this, the way they collaborate to provide those differentiated opportunities for kids, they've actually presented to the whole administration in the summer. They just shared last week with colleagues during professional learning. And what you said is key. This is an ongoing process where we need to keep iterating, working, developing on differentiation. That actually takes us to one of our next questions. Tell us a little bit more. Maybe you've seen it either in another school or in the research. Imagine now in these heterogeneous classes, you have students who are finishing their work early, let's say. Some teachers might respond to that with an online blended learning program. Here, get on your Waterford or your Intermath or whatnot. But you also talked a little bit about opportunities with project-based learning and some more creative ideas there. What are you seeing? What is best practice in your mind to differentiate for those students who may be working above some of their peers?
Absolutely. So there is a line of research both around project-based learning and also student voice and student choice that suggests that giving students all of those things can help to increase engagement, and can also help students to think more critically about issues. So what I first got interested in detracting as a subject because I was a teacher in a school that detracked. I did not have a role in that decision. It just happened. And then we were sent Carol Ann Tomlinson, who literally wrote the book on differentiation and popularized this term. Which we were sent to her to be taught, what to do. And she helped us to think about these year-long projects, and they were really meaningful. I mean, kids were writing novels. Kids were making documentaries. Kids were doing these family genealogy projects where they interviewed every living grandparent in their family and then looked at what had changed over time in our town from their, when they were, I taught mostly 10th graders. So from when they were 15, 16 to when my students were 15, 16. I mean, it's like really incredible things. That requires a lot of structure, right? I know a lot of teenagers, and when you're like, hey, here's some free time, this thing isn't due till May, that's not necessarily going to be their first instinct of what to work on. So we came up with some really, first of all, really regular check-ins, right? So it wasn't just like, oh, you're turning it in May, the end. Or even at the end of the quarter, we were on a quarter grading system. But there were regular, every 2 weeks, you were showing us what you had been working on. And that feedback that we then gave was guided by some really strong rubrics that we collaborated with Dr. Tomlinson to develop. I think that can also be really powerful at the elementary and middle grades level, but you need even more structure and you need more people in the classroom, right? People who can make sure that kids are on task, who can answer questions, somebody who's working with the kids who are still mastering the grade level material, who maybe need some more practice before they're ready to do any sort of project-based learning. And that doesn't mean that those kids don't get to do it. It's that they're doing it in a way that then integrates where they need the additional support. And I think that's something that's really important as well, that we're not just putting everybody in the same classroom and then essentially retracking, but within the classroom, because that sends some like really unhelpful messages to students versus we really think you can be successful about this. We really believe in you. We have the resources to make sure that you're successful, and we're going to make sure you get those resources because you're worth it. I think those messages and acting on them are really important. And it's not cheap. It's not cheap. Like let's name it. But I think what I've also learned from my time in Shaker, this is a community that is willing to invest in schools and education, particularly if they can see positive outcomes for students.
I really appreciate that. And you make me wonder how we can really look at the way that we do exhibition at our elementary schools, which is a multiple months long project. Many young people, they talk about their exhibition years later because it was such a meaningful learning impact. I wonder how we might look at that as an entry point to what you're describing in some of our other years. Dr. Thornton, we have really, I think, the ultimate question for you here. You get to see all kinds of schools. You're the chairperson for the committee. In your professional opinion, what would you say is Shaker's number one strength? And what is our number one opportunity that we really need to work on to make this work well?
I think that's a great question. I'll start with the strengths. And I think that the strengths, as cheesy as it sounds, is the people. And that was something, when I was first hearing about this program and talking to Dr. Moore and thinking about how other communities have sometimes responded, I was like, oh, I don't know. I don't know how this is going to go. Sometimes there's a sense, of like, our generational chances can feel very precarious. Are our kids going to do better than we're doing? Are we giving them the tools to do just as well as we did? That can feel really scary when we then like sort of shake up the thing that we've invested all this time in, and money, because it costs money to move into Shaker, or to move anywhere. And even people who said that they were thinking about leaving the district or maybe had left the district, still very forthrightly said, I want this to work. I hope that this works. This we want integrated classrooms. We did not move to Shaker to have our students be segregated from other students. I don't think you need to have that conversation as much with your community. Folks are bought into school is not just for my child. School is for all the children. And even if I don't have kids, school is for the community in addition to the individual student success. Like both of those things are really important and we can do both of those things. I left feeling really positively about the community. I think that the opportunity is in the details, in the how, so I think there is a broad recognition of need. And now you're moving into this phase of like, but what does that look like? Like, okay, I'm on board. I've read about the history of tracking. It's not good. We have all the data, that can show that students were really reproducing social privileges and lack of social privileges more than test scores or grades, right? Like we see that. What do we do about it so that all students are successful and leave Shaker schools equipped to follow whatever their particular dream might be? And while they're there, how do we get them to dream as big as possible? So I think that's hard. And I don't think I very naively, when I started my doctoral studies, I thought, okay, here's what I'm going to do. Like my contribution is I'm going to come up with a checklist. I'm going to figure out here's what schools need to do in order to detrack and have it work for everybody. And I'm going to validate it. I'm going to survey all these schools. I built all these great relationships. Every school is different. Every school year is different. Every classroom is different day to day because kids are not, they're not robots that we're programming. They are human beings who are coming in with their own hopes and dreams and fights they had with their mom in the car that morning, and parents who are struggling to make ends meet, and grandparents who are sick. Like they're bringing everything that happens in their lives, good and bad, to school. And that's just different every day. And so I think that's the challenge, is to find those concrete steps. And they do exist. There are books. I recommended several of them to the district that are evidence-based, and to say, here's what's worked in other districts. And then how do we then translate that to our particular context? I can't answer that for that last question for you. That's a question as a community that you all have to answer.
I really appreciate that, Dr. Thornton, and thank you for your time all last year and tonight. Folks, we're going to take this opportunity to transition into the quantitative portion of tonight's discussion. When we say quantitative, we simply mean data analysis based on student outcome or test scores. A couple of brief notes before we dig into some of the numbers here. NWEA is the company, the organization that puts together the measures of academic progress assessments. Our Shaker students, K-10, take that assessment 3 times a year. And what they were able to do for us is to run a statistical analysis, what they call a virtual comparison group. And what that VCG allows us to do is to compare our students' growth in 1 year's time, last year, to other students' 1-year growth who were similar. Similar in how they started the year, or their RIT score, their starting MAP score, achievement level, as well as school factors, including levels of poverty, the number of instructional days, proximity to an urban core, and so on and so forth. So the purpose of this virtual comparison group is to say, here's where our Shaker students started last year, here's where they ended, How does that growth compare to students who are very similar to them? Now, typically, when you get your MAP reports for your child, it'll have percentage or percentiles, and that is comparing your child to an average of all children to a normed comparison group way back in 2016. If you're like us, you're left wanting a little bit. You're saying, well, gosh, kids today are different from 2016, and Shaker has gone about this detracking journey. So we have a couple of major factors that really drove us to this apples to apples comparison to say, kids like ours, how much did they grow and how does that compare to Shaker? Let's find out. Tonight, we'll talk about the median growth in K-8, which is really where our detracking initiative has been centered. We'll take a look at performance distributions to see where our students even start at the beginning of the year. We'll take a look at median student growth and then disaggregate it based on ethnicity. And finally, we'll take a look at Algebra 1 enrollment in that 8th grade year, which has really been our key performance indicator number 2. It's been a leading indicator for how this detracking initiative is going. This slide, this K-8 perspective, this is going to test us on our ability to check out this chart. Again, the main question is, how do Shaker students grow when compared with similar peers? Anytime you see 50 or below, that would suggest less growth. If it's 50 on the nose, they grew just the same as similar peers. And if you see numbers above 50, that means that they're actually growing at faster rates than similar peers. And you'll notice in this chart that we've got some areas where our students are spot on for kids just like them. That might be 3rd grade math, for example, spot on 50. You might also see areas where we are significantly outgrowing our students. An example of that might be 3rd grade reading. And you see some areas where we need to draw our attention, find out why, provide additional or different resources for both teachers and students. 2nd grade math and reading, as well as 5th grade, are examples of that. Now, when we talk about detracking, we talked about integrating our classes really at Woodbury and Middle. And last year, we did have a standalone Woodbury school. So as we move forward here, you're really going to see 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, which has been the height of this detracking initiative. What this middle school performance distribution shows us is where our students are starting at the beginning of the year. On the left side, you see the percentile bands. Students who started the year at the 10th percentile or below, the 20th percentile or below, 30th, and so on and so forth. That's what those gray bars are showing us. What this suggests to us is that we actually have, starting in the year, most of our students, the distribution is skewed towards those in the 70th, 80th, and 90th percentiles or above. What this suggests is our students are starting the year strong. Not all of our students, it is a spread, but the majority of our kids actually begin in that upper percentile band. That's important to note because if we're going to be looking at growth, we want to know how they began. When we consider math and reading, grades 7 and 8, we notice that right down the line, our students are about that 50th percentile mark, meeting growth of those similar students. In 8th grade math and 7th and 8th grade reading, our students are actually outperforming or outgrowing similar peers. And in 7th grade math, we have a little bit of room to grow, although they're meeting similar growth percentiles as their peers. Diving in a little bit further, how might that look across the percentile bands? And this is a really important graph. It relates to what Dr. Thornton was hearing from parents, what some of the questions in the chat inquired about, this idea of students who are may have previously been accelerated, or they're performing consistently high, they're high achievers. How are they doing in this transition? Let's take a look. In middle school math, what this is telling us is that students beginning the year at the 40th percentile and above meet or exceed their similar peers. And in fact, if you take a look at those who start the year in the 70th, 80th, or 90th percentile and above, the students who are performing highest in Shaker, they're actually outperforming their similar peers in other districts at the highest rates. This is pretty good news for our students who are historically high achieving. What this suggests is that they continue to outperform similar peers. Similar conversation in reading. In reading, it's actually students in the 20th percentile and above who meet or exceed similar peers for growth. And in fact, those at the 60th percentile, that's the highest bar there, they're outperforming their peers, similar peers, quite significantly there. It's important in our district. We have significant equity dedication. Therefore, we always disaggregate data. How is this looking for different groups of ethnicity or gender, socioeconomic status, etc.? For the purposes of this graph, we're going to zoom in on ethnicity. Similar to our conversation above, 50 is spot on. Above 50 means outgrowing peers. Below 50 means undergrowing peers. One thing to note, while this is broken down or disaggregated by ethnicity, it's not comparing that group's student growth measures by other students only in that group. It is by the average students in this comparison. What I mean by that is, if we take a look at 7th grade Black or African American students in math, they're performing on average at the 41st percentile compared to all students in the 7th grade in this study. Compare that with white students in Shaker who are at the 55th percentile or growing more than 55% of their peers, compared to all of the students in this study. You will notice Hispanic, multi-ethnic, and white students in 8th grade are significantly outgrowing peers, suggesting that we have much more work to do in order to address that opportunity gap and make sure that all ethnicities are accessing and feeling success in that 8th grade class and in other places as well. Similar chart for reading. In reading, you'll notice far more green. That's good. 50th and above is our minimum goal threshold. We're pushing higher. What this would suggest to us is that in 5th grade in particular, we needed to invest far more attention and resources to our Black or Hispanic population of students. And we have some other areas that demonstrate success. We noticed in 7th grade, we're working to address some of those opportunity gaps. And finally, oftentimes we get questions, particularly when we present to the board, about performance data. Those charts you saw before were about growth. How much are students growing? We also have talked about achievement in the past, and one of the main indicators of achievement is student success in Algebra 1. That's why this is key performance indicator number 2 for the district. What this big chart shows is the changes in enrollment for Algebra 1 in 8th grade. Only 20% of Ohio students take Algebra 1 in 8th grade. In Shaker, that number is now 100%. This chart discusses how that number has evolved over time. Okay. Dr. Thornton shared some of the qualitative aspects that we've uncovered through many interviews and focus groups. You've now seen how our growth compares to some other similar districts and similar children. We'll keep mining this information. We layer on, as we present it to the board, achievement data, our report card data, which includes disaggregated performance data. Our intention is to learn as much about this process as we can so that we can keep informing continuous improvement. Dr. Thornton, you've been a tremendous help to that. This study for our virtual comparison group has helped as well, as has the community feedback. If I had parting words, it would be this. We did our superintendent series last year, and we heard from our community. We believe in what you're doing. We want to see the data that shows that it's working. That was really the fire that lit us to engage in this level of data analysis and collection. And we appreciate you as a community for guiding us there. Dr. Glasner, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you. I would echo both what you've said, Dr. Moore, and also Dr. Thornton. The only thing I would want to add, which I think everybody understands, the information that we're sharing this evening represents the analysis that we're able to do at a point in time in our district. And we know already this year, the work continues to evolve and grow. For example, you highlighted eighth grade math and the work that they've been doing. Well, I know because we've been visiting the middle school recently, the work that the eighth grade math team is doing is also spreading to other departments, other grade levels at the middle school and at the high school. And so already things have evolved since this point in time. Our commitment to our community is that we're going to continue to monitor and share our progress with this effort because it's so important to continue to identify what's going well and where we can improve. Our goal is for all students to be prepared to have and to pursue the kinds of options that they want to pursue when they get to certainly the later years in high school and beyond. And that's why the middle years is so important, because it really helps to ensure that students are getting the foundational learning they need to pursue whatever course pathway they want to beyond at high school and beyond. But thank you, everybody, for joining. We really appreciate it. Appreciate the questions and comments. Thank you again, Dr. Thornton. And we look forward to continuing the work and this conversation.
Yeah, I just want to say thanks again to the community. You have been so welcoming, so helpful, and it's adding, I think, also just not just to the knowledge about Shaker, but nationally. I was talking to a doctoral student. She's from the Netherlands, and she was talking about how educational opportunity there is really narrow. There's a really narrow point in time before students have to make a choice, and really it's the teachers who choose. And that's something that we do differently here. And so I really want to applaud you all and just thank you all so much for having me. I'm just really enjoying being part of this. So thank you.
Thank you, everybody. If anybody has any follow-up questions that did not get answered this evening, you are always welcome to reach out either directly to me, to Dr. Moore. I know we had Dr. Thornton's contact information up earlier, but we are always interested in continuing the conversation. So thank you very much. Have a good evening, everybody.